Today, our group will be presenting the opinions on gender-neutral nouns and pronouns in Spanish and French.
Our group members are Danielle Halen, Blaise Thieleman, Cynthia Lopez, and Kimberly Umana.
Our sociolinguistic research is focused on gendered language and gender identity. The focus of our project is how these subjects affect each other with the current push for gender-neutral nouns and pronouns. While there are many avenues in which gender expression and identity are reflected, the research had to be narrowed down to one or two languages for the sake of scope and time constraints. Our research group decided to focus on Spanish and French in the Los Angeles, California area.
Seeing similar roots to the Latin language, which originally had neutered nouns and pronouns, the question we decided to focus on was, with the growing conversations and expansions of gender identity, how do speakers of Spanish and French feel toward the inclusion of neutral nouns? How do educators feel about potentially learning and teaching neutered nouns in their classrooms?
Key terms of our research are non-binary, neuter nouns, and gender-neutral pronouns. Non-binary refers to a person's gender identity as neither male nor female. Neuter nouns refer to nouns with no gendered suffixes, and gender-neutral pronouns refer to pronouns that do not emphasize a specific gender identity.
The research group created a survey assessing the willingness to incorporate gender-neutral language more into casual speech and within institutional settings of local Spanish and French speakers of the Los Angeles area. Demographics such as gender identity, age, knowledge of non-binary individuals, knowledge of gender-neutral language, and knowledge of French and Spanish were all included and assessed in the survey. The survey concluded with a text box to allow participants to express a written opinion on integrating gender-neutral language. There were 21 responses in total, which indicates low engagement despite the team's best effort to reach out to as many individuals as possible.
In looking at the demographic information obtained from the survey, a number of factors can be determined. Looking first at gender, 17 of 21 responders are female, 3 are male, and 1 person chose not to identify. 10 of the participants are between the ages of 18 through 29. Other age brackets include 3 or 4 people up to the 54 plus selections. Language and identity-wise, all participants who answered are either familiar with or native Spanish speakers. However, 14 of those surveyed were unable to speak French, and only 5 were familiar with speaking French at all. In this relation, there were no individuals who were fluent in French, but there were also no participants who could not speak Spanish to some extent.
Going into details surrounding the prompt directly, 9 out of the 21 survey takers did not personally know a non-binary person. 8 out of 21 survey takers did personally know a non-binary person, with 4 being unsure if they did at all. A majority of the participants were familiar with neutral nouns. However, 7 were not. General opinions on gender-neutral nouns were altogether neutral. In a direct scale question about the introduction of gender-neutral nouns in Spanish or French, 9 are in favor, 8 directly neutral, and only 3 have a directly low opinion.
Questions about Spanish gender-neutral nouns, however, yielded an overall mixed opinion. For example, Latinx is a familiar term for the majority of responders, but opinions were highly neutral rather than favorable. The same neutral of opinion was also found for the terms ele and amigui. While familiarity for ele and amigui were lower, the acceptability for amigui is slightly more favorable than ele. Ele had an equal number of people who considered the term positive or negative. Amigui had only 2 more people in favor of the term than against it.
The results gained on French gender-neutral nouns were limited, as both words were unfamiliar to, or not applicable for those who responded. While a majority remained in neutral favorability of these words, there is a stark difference between those in favor of them, 1 for both words, and those against them, 5 for il and 6 for hux, respectively.
While many questions on the survey are selections from a set of options, an open response question is provided at the end of the survey. This question provided direct opinions from participants towards gender-fair language. 11 total responses were analyzed and a number of themes were determined within these responses. 7 of these responses are thematically favorable towards gender-fair language, with a number of people being open to change. Other responses showed that participants simply lack the knowledge required to understand language use surrounding gender. Only one response was entirely neutral opinion towards the question, but it did include an openness to change. Some positive responses held concerns that gender-neutral language and pronouns were a result of colonization, even though the intention is in the right place. Only 2 responses were outright negative towards gender-neutral language. These responses were 1 or 2 word responses that mostly consisted of harsh language towards the prompt. 10 participants did not leave a short response of their opinion.
The group did not voice any explicit expectations of results before sending out the survey. Excluding written responses, the 2 major themes that were clearly taken away from the survey was that there is a generally hesitant attitude toward inclusion of neuter nouns and pronouns in both Spanish and French, and there is a lack of understanding of neuter nouns and pronouns in general. The trends found in this data may have to do more with age range rather than any other factor collected from our research.
The gender demographic is heavily skewed towards females, while age range is somewhat more evenly distributed. 50% of the age demographic fell between 18 to 29, while the other half was divided between 30 to 71. Given that these 2 themes were nearly even in one particular question from our survey, rate your opinion of introducing gender-neutral nouns in either French or Spanish. It can be assumed that a surveyor's gender did not influence their answer as much as their age, since more women than men and non-binary participants took the survey.
What also may be gathered by the data is that the push for gender-neutral nouns and pronouns, especially in communities of Spanish speakers, is going to be a slow process. The results from surveying whether an individual was at least familiar with neutral terms showed a majority of a lack of knowledge. When asking for how favorable introducing neutral nouns and pronouns would be, the results showed that most of the participants were definitely not in favor. These results are consistent with the hesitations seen in some of the written responses.
This topic interested our group by trying to understand why neuter nouns from Latin never seem to be translated into any of the modern Romance languages, and if there was a particular reason why this may have never occurred. Upon reviewing the sample data the group has collected, the data demonstrates personal biases on the topic as usually fixed data points. While many are open to change given more information on gender-fair language, it goes to show how much it matters that these particular inquiries should be given more attention in order to gather more accurate, opinionated results in a future survey.
The limitations we were confronted with in this survey were the lack of French speakers able to take the survey to give a better comparison to the opinions of French speakers to Spanish speakers, though there seemed to be a similar trend in the 2 themes seen among Spanish speakers. There were not enough responses for French to determine this accurately.
In conclusion, our group determined that the answer to our research question based on the results of the survey is that there is a lot of resistance concerning the conversation of integrating newer gender identities within the 2 standardized forms of Spanish and French.
To further this point, we have compared our findings with the article Gender-Neutral and Non-Binary Language Practices in the Spanish Language Classroom, Tensions Between Disciplinary and Societal Changes. The research performed by Diaz et al. Mentions on how there are unique implications on gendered languages when it is applied to humans.
Taking this into the results from our survey, this means that when speakers of Spanish refer to themselves through pronouns, adjectives, etc., they find themselves socially and linguistically constrained to do so within expected feminine or masculine grammatical gender binaries. Spanish and French speakers who took the survey expressed this implicit bias and how it is still very difficult to expand upon it. A specific example from our survey was the results on the term of amigui.
The implications were that while Spanish speakers were somewhat familiar with the term, because it is easy to detect and that it stems from the word amiga or amigo, surveyors were still not inclined to use this term in their everyday speech. Therefore, the implication from these results is that change within these two languages will need to be very patient when concerning neuter nouns and pronouns.